There's a concept called the wounded healer.
Yes.
And the most powerful shamans, magicians, and healers are the broken ones.
Yeah.
As children in these tribes either had a near-death experience or a disease or some trauma opens the channels of communication, and they become the shaman of the tribe. And they heal not in spite of the wounds, but because of the wounds. They're in so much pain, they understand the pain of others,
Yes.
and they address them, but it eventually destroys them. And there's traditions in circumpolar shaman tribes. Shamans in North and South, they end up like Elvis. They end up as fat drug addicts, sick people, just there. And the tribe's like, well, that's your job. You're the one who has to heal us and entertain us and advise us. And the shaman's like, I know, that's my job.
Burden.
And they die. And Elvis was carrying that burden. He was a wounded healer, a shaman. And I have other theories. I try to approach it from Jungian, alchemical, different theories. We'll never know. It's a mystery. Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Bite, and welcome to that intro from a promotion from my book, The Occult Elvis, dealing with the wounded healer and with trauma. And of course, my book certainly deals a lot with Jung, and these topics will be relevant today. So again, I welcome you. I hope you're doing well on this Monday, and I hope everybody, if you celebrate, had a good Halloween or Day of the Dead or All Souls weekend, and you are transformed as the veils get thinner and the shadows get longer. My name is Miguel Connor. If I hadn't said that, I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, and you have arrived at the virtual Alexandria. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Dr. Shahrzad Jalali to discuss several topics dealing again with the intro, with Jung, and with important tools for these days for your healing and individuation. Shahrzad, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all ours. And with us, also keeping us company, we've got Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing on this moon day?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Happy All Souls Day to everybody, and interested to hearing about healing. This world can use some extra healing right now.
Yeah. That goes without saying. So good to see those who are jumping on the chat. As always, if you do have a question or comment, please super chat them so we can get to them. As always, excuse me, please support Aeon Bite in any way you can. I can't do it without you. Not much on the housekeeping side, but I will have more news. Great shows coming this week, including a show on how a regular deck of cards can be transformational and a portal opening. And David Block will join us at the end of the week for his second part of his series, Who Are the Gods? So don't go anywhere and don't forget. All right, Shahrzad, tell us a little bit about yourself and your own journey into becoming who you are today and what you do today.
Well, that's a very complicated question.
Yeah, it might take more. We'll unpack it as we go, right?
I'm a clinical psychologist in Newport Beach, California area. I run a couple of private practices here, and I recently wrote a book that came out actually this past September regarding trauma and healing from it. So, I guess to tie it into what brought me here, the book is partially based on a traumatic event that I went through and how transformative it was for me. Hence, I figured sharing journey will help people who are on the verge of dealing with something similar to essentially process it in a little bit of a different point of view than we normally do when we're dealing with trauma.
Yes, the book is The Fire That Makes Us, Unveiling the Transformative Power of Trauma. So,
Correct.
would you mind sharing what this traumatic event and how you approached it or found new insights in dealing with this?
Absolutely. So I actually went through a very horrific car accident about 14 years ago. I had gone back home to visit my parents, and they were dropping me off at the airport to come back here to the States. And a drunk driver on the other side of the street in a truck fell asleep and landed on our car, which kind of caused a very
Mhm.
um, deadly accident. My father passed at impact, and I was thrown out of the car and injured very severely. So I had to go through several surgeries, and the healing process was lengthy and obviously, as any healing process is, unpleasant. And as I was going through it, for anyone who has ever suffered anything traumatic, one of the first things you do is you question everything. You question life, why this had to happen, why it had to happen to you, and what all of it means. Because somehow, as humans, we're always looking to find meaning in stuff as if it will make the process easier for us to digest. So I did a lot of writing as I was going through my healing process, just because it's one of those modalities that helps me process information
Mhm.
better. And at one point, one of my sisters picked up parts of my writing and said to me, "You need to turn this into a book and publish it because it's going to help a lot of people." So I took that part of the trauma as well as the amalgamation of the trauma, mainly relational trauma that I've observed in my clinical practice over the past 15 years. And I created the story of Charlotte, who's the main character of the book, who's
Mhm.
trying to deal with all of this. But as everybody else witnesses her, she seems very functional and well put together. Yet it's the unprocessed hand of the trauma that's dominating her life and essentially making all her moves. So the book tells her story, but at the end of each chapter, I stop, I kind of process the psychological component of what she's going through and guide the reader in how to navigate that dynamic if it's something that they are struggling with at the moment.
Yeah, God. Yeah, you went through a lot. And how did you question your worldview? Or again, I think that's the question, right?
Hmm.
Why me? And I've shared with audiences that one of my turning points was being in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and there was some old timer, this beautiful gentleman, 30 years sobriety, and he was talking, and in Chicago, he was talking about how his son went out to the store and was murdered by gangs, and he was
Wow.
crying to God, and he kept saying, "Why me? Why me?" And a voice said, "Why not?" And he felt released because he realized, what, I'm better than other humans and animals and civilized. Life is life.
Hmm.
That's just the way it is, right? Or how did it help you? Or how did you change your worldview?
Well, I think one thing that I really want to bring attention to is there is this negative, I would say, pull, I believe, inside most humans that gravitates towards darkness. And we all like to be victims because I feel like once we get to be a victim, it takes away our authority. And in some ways, that's very, I guess, freeing because if I can't do anything about it, then why should I try? And, I can just be this person that everyone feels sorry for. And I have an excuse to not be really involved in life and show up. And I think we all have to be very careful about identifying with this role because
Hmm.
doing what I do, I very much see it in all humans and our gravitation towards it. And especially as the world becomes harder and harder, we all like to blame each other and kind of say, well, there's not much I can do. And I think this journey taught me the exact opposite of that, how much agency I had that I decided to just put on the back burner when I went through this. And I think what helped me was reconnecting with my sense of agency and learning that not only this is part of life, and if you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, yes, bad things happen. um, there is no reason why it happens to you in particular. You just happen to be in that space in that moment. And it's not the end of your story once you go through something like this. In fact, it can even be very powerful, hence the name of the book,
Hmm.
The Fire That Makes Us, because fire has a negative connotation for people. It's always something that burns and destroys, but it also forges into something else. So if we can relate to it differently, it can actually, kind of take you to the best version of yourself.
Very well said indeed. And yes, I'm great at playing the victim. It's so addictive.
It's
And
very addictive.
it is, yeah. And then I pretend, well, I'm just being stoic. No, I'm being a victim. I'm trying to be stoic. Or the other one is like you're just saying, I just project my shadow onto everybody and it's the world's fault. And of course, the idea where you'll go insane after every tragedy, if you had only left the airport 10 minutes early, or if
Exactly.
I'd only call my mother before a million things.
Correct.
And before you know, you're going insane. You're trying to play God, but you're actually going insane, right?
Yes, exactly. I think it's inevitable. All of us go through that process, but bringing awareness to it, I think, can really change this dynamic for your listeners out there who are potentially dealing with something at the moment, or God forbid, will come to deal with it in the future. And just to make a point here, trauma doesn't always have to be something as negative as I just depicted. Sometimes just people have a relationship come to an end that feels very dramatic to them. Sometimes you leave a job that you worked at for many years and you feel like this is the end, why
Right.
was I let go? So it can have many shapes or forms.
So, well, then why don't we define what is trauma? Because trauma is like, as I've said
Hmm.
before, people use that term, oh, this movie was terrible. I'm traumatized. Or I had to
Hmm.
talk to this person on the phone for an hour. It was traumatizing. But how do you define trauma? I love Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, where
Yes,
he and his son simply say it's an inner wound that doesn't heal. You were in a crash, there was the physical trauma, but then there's that inner trauma that sometimes most of science just doesn't deal with. But how do you define trauma?
I would say mainly trauma is an event or even a series of experiences that overwhelm a person's ability to cope
Hmm.
and makes them feel very helpless, unsafe, or disconnected from themselves or others. And I would say that last part is the worst thing that can happen, where
Hmm.
you end up in this realm of complete dissociation, which you're not always even aware of because it becomes a self-protecting mechanism, right? So if
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
disconnected, I won't hurt anymore, essentially. And all of this happens so unconsciously and that most of us aren't even aware that we're living in this realm.
Very true, very true. From a Jungian perspective, what do you think? Should we call it shadow creation, the creation of complexes, these kind of pseudo personalities? That would be it.
I would say so. So it's not just what happens to you, it's also what happens inside of you as a result of what happened. And what's happening inside could be it triggers an archetypal component, it triggers a complex, or
Hmm.
it even gives birth to a new complex, given, how you have dealt with the series of complexes prior to that, that we all have at any given point, of
Uh,
course.
oh, yeah. Too many, too many. So you would say that I think us chatting, one of the central messages is we're not powerless. That's the key, to be dynamic
Mhm.
when dealing or confronting with trauma.
You know, you brought up Jung, and what I love about Jungian philosophy, because to me it's more than just psychological, is that there is a component of psychology, mythology, and spirituality.
Mhm.
And in order to deal with whatever pain you have, I think you need a combination of all of this to kind of regain control over it. Because what happens when we're going through something traumatic is, our sense of self becomes very small and the trauma becomes very big and it engulfs us. Now, the only way to live life, I think the only chance that we have is if we expand our sense of self to become bigger than the trauma. So now the trauma is simply something that we endured, not us in our entirety, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I think Jung said, like with complexes, you can't exercise or destroy complex. You just outgrow them. Like you just say,
Correct.
you become
Yes.
bigger than
Then the
they are.
complex.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're happy. That's what the shadow and the complexes want, right? They want
Yes.
integration. They're not there to
Destroy
torment us.
you. Yes, exactly. They're just our kind of guides to a higher, better self if we learn how to communicate with them properly. Absolutely.
And when you went through your healing, were there any archetypes or myths, or even, of course, we forget fairy tales are extremely archetypal, that helped you or that you identified with you, that helped you through your healing and growth?
You know, it's interesting you ask me that. So my first name is Shahrzad, and it goes back to the 1001 Nights story. Um, for those of us who are not familiar with it, so there is a Persian fable, I would say, that
Mhm.
there was a king whose wife had betrayed him, and as a result, he hated all women. And he would ask for a different woman every night, and then he would behead them afterwards. That's how
Mhm.
disconnected he was. So then one night he asked for the prime minister's daughter, whose name was Scheherazade, and the prime minister finds out and goes to his daughter and says, "You need to escape immediately because, well, you know what your future entails." And she says, "No, I think I can turn him." And she goes to his presence and she starts telling him a story. And the story lasts 1001 nights. By
Mhm.
the end of this time period, the king falls in love with her, marries her, and forgives all women. And I remember as a little girl coming to the States and, going to school and people having a lot of difficulty pronouncing my name. I came home one day crying and I told my dad, "What is this name you given me? No one can pronounce it. I hate my name." And he said, "Well, I named you this so you can find solutions to the problems life throws at you." And for some reason, as I was going through this, that sentence kept on showing up for me,
Mhm.
as if it was not okay for me to just say, "Okay, this happened and I am in pain and I am suffering," but that somehow I was to put that into a story. Somehow I was guided to find meaning in it and to essentially find a solution out of the problem. And I think that was what archetypally guided me in the process, believe it or not.
And your name, Scheherazade, what does it mean in Persian?
It's just the name of the girl. It's simply a name. I don't think it has a significance, but that's where it comes from, the 1001 Night
Yes,
story.
yeah.
Yeah.
My mom used to read that to me as a kid. I loved
Really?
it, but she, of course, she skipped the part of why the original. I didn't get that one. It was too much, but such beautiful, yeah, very much archetypal stories for
Yes.
sure. So, yeah, and you were, God, you were mentioning, I forgot what was the part you mentioned? You were mentioning about the stories and the
Mhm.
archetypes. What do you think the story is? Is it about uh, feminine integration, or what? The 1001 Nights.
You know what? I think it's about a little bit of everything when your shadow turns into anger and overtakes you, and you're so blind to it that you just want to kind of get rid of symbolically and
Yeah.
literally you want to get rid of the feminine, right? Which is your sense of connection and nurture and I would say emotions. But if you find your way back to it, you can find peace with the self again.
Yeah, I mean, Jung was very specific. We have to integrate our anima and animus, regardless of how they appear. That's the
Correct.
great cosmic story that you find in all these tales, which, of course, this
Exactly.
emperor had to do. He never would have found peace, and a lot of victims would have continued. And you said the name keep coming up and up again. In your practice, do
Mhm.
you advise your clients to follow the synchronicities, or is that something you
Y-
champion?
Yes, I like to very much work with my patients from a symbolic realm. So there's a lot of essentially keeping one foot out in the problem and one foot in the symbolic world.
Mhm.
So that's why I bring a lot of their fantasies, their dreams, their symbolism around it, and really bank on those symbols to help us get through the healing process because I do think they are guides sent to us from beyond. And by beyond, I don't necessarily mean, spiritually, but beyond ourselves, what our
Right.
consciousness can handle. Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more there. So, you're somebody comes to you and, yeah,
Mhm.
they're first, how do you work with them? I guess must be you have to explain to them what is trauma and that they have trauma, because often we assume there's this saying, which I think is one of the most pernicious sayings in history, that says
Mm.
time heals all wounds. And as I get wiser, I realize time doesn't heal a
Heal
single
any
wound.
wounds. I agree with you. In fact, I think it worsens it if you don't
It
really bring
does.
it. Yes.
So you have to explain or let patients know that yes, there is trauma, it hasn't gone away, and you have to recognize it. Is that the first step, or is it telling them you have power over these seemingly unconscious things that you do in life?
I believe trauma is somewhat of a tainted word for us. A lot of
Mhm,
people, as soon as they hear it, they're like, no, I don't have any trauma. I actually grew up with great parents. A funny story, I always thought I had amazing parents. My parents were both very loving, very devoted. They really, sacrificed, I would say, a lot to raise me and my sisters
mhm.
until I became a psychologist. And then I became a psychologist, and I was, oh my God, did I have a dysfunctional family? And I think most of the people that come to me, like me, have this naivete around the fact that, oh, I had great parents. And not
Yeah,
that people don't get me wrong, I did as well. But I think there is so much wounding in all humans that we just kind of hand over from one generation to the next, not even knowing we're doing it. So I try to refrain from using any particular words and I try to stay with their story and I just raise questions that take them down the path that I want them to go down because I feel like when people aren't necessarily ready to hear something, you putting it out there doesn't always help. So I just try to cultivate the environment that helps them at least build some awareness around what's happening.
yeah, that's the battle. Yeah, and of course, what did Tolstoy famously say? All families are unhappy, but they're in their own unique way. And like you said, yeah, we are handing down ancestral trauma.
Correct.
Our parents are programmed with the same complexes that their grandparents are handing it out. And at the end of the day, I think they're doing their best. I think understanding of my parents really opened things up to understand their journey and what they're going through and realizing, they're actually great. They did what they could, right?
Absolutely. Exactly.
And That was another story or another saying that I love, and apologize for these sayings, but you got my mind working. But what did Ram Dass famously said, and it's timely. He said, "If you think you're enlightened, try spending a holiday weekend with your family." And that's when the triggers happen, the complexes,
Yes.
the trauma, the shadow, and you realize, oh my God, I thought I had a good career and a spouse, and I thought I was independent all these
Hmm.
years, and you are just devolving into a little screaming child in front of your mother or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yes, they know what button to push and how to push it. Speaking of the holidays, I think we're all entering that time of the year where, our complexes have a way of taking over and showing up.
Yeah, yeah, it's all coming out. And you would say it's a good thing. It's we need to face these things. We can't avoid them
Yes.
because it doesn't matter if you don't visit your parents for 10 Thanksgivings. Like you were saying, time is nothing to these to complexes and these things.
Yeah.
The triggers will come up, the trauma will come up.
No, absolutely. We cannot escape this. I am also at fault of doing this from time to time. I think stepping away from what hurts us or triggers us is sometimes one of our best or most accessible coping mechanisms. So we all step into it from time to time. And I tell people it's okay to take a break from a problem. But know that you can't just leave it there because it will eventually start to cause problems for you. It's kind of leaving food under your bed. Maybe 1 or 2 nights you can get away with it, but eventually you will start to rot and
Yeah,
it will take over the room. So somehow you have to make room for these things and little by little untangle them.
exactly. And I think what also two people have to understand is we think shadow is terrible, but at the very moment our parents said, "Don't touch this," or "No," because we as children were explorative and curious, they were creating shadow material. And
Correct.
all through our life is just shadow, shadow, these boundaries and, disciplines and all that. But unfortunately, we forgot, as in other cultures, how to create initiations when we
Yes.
become men and women, where we say, all right, now you're a woman, now you're a man, time to all this shadow material, there was a reason for this, time to integrate it and become
Mhm.
the next part. So do you think we've lost a little of that initiation in our society, or
Absolutely. I think one of the things that the modern culture is missing is that sense of initiation. Some of the older cultures still have symbolisms of it, like when they have a bar mitzvah or something of that nature.
Mhm.
But I think we've to some extent lost its essence, which is actually kind of a pity that then, culturally we have all these richness that we can integrate into our modern culture that can potentially save us years and years of heartache trying to figure it out ourselves. But maybe we need to go back to our roots and
Mhm.
reconnect with them.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, let me bring in Graham. What do you think, or do you have a question for Dr. Jalali?
Oh, definitely. I was going to say one of the first things that popped into my head is, at least for me, the idea of that search for meaning when it comes to pain
Mhm.
is at least the idea that the pain wasn't meaningless. It wasn't for nothing. And, at least for me, that's one of the big ones, because the thought that, I went through all that and I suffered for nothing, if it meant something, that's at least makes the pain a little more palatable. And what my question is, one of the issues that I find most challenging is kind of adjacent to that poor pitiful me victim syndrome.
Mhm.
And that's the idea that after you've built enough sandcastles that bullies have come around and kicked over, or the tide has washed away, you get up and you say, why do I really want to build yet another one today? And it's not really a poor pitiful me. It's more of an acceptance of reality and a questioning why put forth that sort of effort. I was curious if you had insights into how to address that sort of issue, Peg.
Yes, you actually pointed out something very interesting. When we go through something, it has two sides to it, like everything else in this universe. Nothing is fully bad or fully good, right? So when you go through something negative, you initially identify with the negative aspect of it. Like you go through a loss, and all you can think about is that you're missing this component. Now, if you turn that around, imagine it as a coin. On the other side of it is now there is a gap that needs to be filled.
Mhm.
And somewhat, somehow, you can find a way to fill that gap yourself, whether that is through awakening a part of you that can do that, or um, calling to consciousness and archetypal energy that's dormant in you at that moment, right? So once you do that, I think that will somehow impact the second part of your question, which is where do I find the motivation after so many losses to rebuild again? So on the other side of that coin, where the positive is, that will give birth to that motivation. You don't need to create the motivation yourself. You just need to find the positive, and that positive will pave the way and move forward. I think one of the biggest parts for people at times like this is they feel like they have to do something. You don't
Mhm.
have to do anything. You just have to get out of your own way so you can see the situation from a with perspective, well-rounded and kind of state of mind, and that by itself will give birth to your next step.
No, it makes sense. I was going to say, to a certain extent, I'm a fatalist and realist because I'm a trained economist, and as they say in economics, in the long run, we're all dead. So,
I don't disagree with that.
It is a zero-sum game, huh?
We're all gonna at one point exit this realm. I guess what matters is what we do with the time we have here. The fact that our life process is very nihilistic in nature, it's not anything any of us can debate. But even given that notion, we are still here for however long we are, and there's a lot of positivity, growth that can come out of this process if we just let ourselves do it.
no, definitely. I sum that up with, we're all going to die. What we can do is pick which hill we're going to die on and what we're going to die for. So,
Mhm.
Peg.
Yep.
Well said. Well said. What we do in life echoes in eternity. Quoting from
Mhm.
Gladiator, the great philosopher Maximus. Uh, in your work, you also talk about somatic work and how it's
Correct.
a central part of your practice and
Mhm.
crucial for healing. Could you explain what is somatic work?
Absolutely. So, most of the new research actually alludes to the fact that trauma, more than getting stored in the mind, gets stored in the body. Because when we go through something traumatic, the body needs to finish having a physiological response, a nervous system response to that, that usually gets interrupted during trauma. So
Mhm.
that energy is stored in the body, and the only way we can actually overcome the trauma is to release that stored energy in the body. And that when you work with people somatically, this is usually in the form of shaking or crying, or other sorts of definitely somatic releases, right? But at the end of the day, what they all do is they help people get rid of stored up emotional stress that we continuously carry throughout the day in our body when we haven't really targeted it. It's very much nervous system work more than anything.
And what would be some examples that
Mhm.
from this happening, appearing in the body and so forth?
Okay. Imagine, for example, someone like me who's been in a car accident now goes through life and has a level of hypervigilance. Like every time I hear a loud noise, or every time someone abruptly appears in front of me, or when I'm driving and I have a near accident, right? So my body will have a physiological response to that notion that's potentially a lot more pronounced than your body that
Mhm.
has not suffered a similar trauma, right? So now what do we do with this is I will deliberately keep that person and that thought process, kind of like exposure therapy. Meanwhile, doing techniques to regulate their nervous system so their body gets to re-experience that state of mind in a more relaxed state. So now the brain associates it with a more um, essentially settled nervous system response that it was initially experiencing.
No, that makes sense. And of course, as science has told us, our heart has neurons, our gut has
Exactly.
neurons. So there's a
Exactly,
lot
exactly.
more. There's a lot more
Yeah,
thinking going on than in our brains, right?
absolutely. Yes, we have physiological responses to stuff. So I've created a course actually as a result of this Regulate to Rise that helps people. It's an 8 module course that helps people reset their nervous system if they're having any kind of particular anger or hypovigilance, or they're easily triggered. So we want to go about it from both aspects, the psyche and the body, because I think
Mhm.
they work together in harmony at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a wise person once told me the body don't lie. That's the one part of us that doesn't fool us, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes, you can even notice this yourself when you start to think about it. Let's say you're in the presence of someone, or something around you happens, and you notice that your chest starts to kind of feel uncomfortable, fluttery, or your stomach drops, or you feel like you're holding to your breath and not breathing easily, or you feel tension in your back. So if we learn the language of the body, we can very easily pick up on these cues.
And your course, just for the audience, is that,
Yes,
I have your website on the show notes. Is that an
yes.
online course or a personal course?
It's an online course for the time being. So yes, if they go to drsharzadjalali.com, there's a tab on there regarding the course and how to kind of partake in it.
Okay. It certainly makes sense. Yeah, it reminds me of the story, Shahrzad, when
Mhm.
I was having these voices, or my unconscious was telling me I had to write this Elvis book, and I
Mhm.
was resisting, and I thought I'd beaten it, but guess what? I started having hip aches
Wow.
you know, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have to get a hip replacement. I can barely walk. I can't walk my dogs and all that." And as soon as I sat down and started writing the Elvis book, the hip
It
pains
went
went
away.
away. So of course, hip and Elvis, of course, go hand in hand. So that was when the body was telling me, or it was going through that my unconscious was telling me through my hips, you need to write this book.
Yes, that's what I don't like about, to tell you the truth, the way we practice psychology these days, given insurances and managed care, we're so much into diagnosing everything. Whereas all these things that we feel, whether it's actual pain in the body, or pain in the psyche in the form of panic, depression, anxiety,
Mhm.
a lot of times, and I want to emphasize this because when I say this, sometimes people say, oh, okay, so everything can be healed this way. No, sometimes it's an actual physiological thing that needs treatment. But for the most part, a lot of them are here to guide us through fixing what needs to get fixed. So they're not necessarily what's wrong with us, but if we learn to look at them symbolically, there are guides.
Exactly. I think as I've learned, part of the solution is to listen to your unconscious, to listen to your body, because it has all
Absolutely.
the answers that our conscious mind or ego doesn't have. And our shadow, our trauma, they're not trying to torture us, but they're actually there with these lessons. The old, you go down to the cave to face the dragon. The dragon is scary, but the dragon holds all the treasures.
Correct.
But it's gotta be done. And what about, do you work with, addiction too? Or I know it's a hard topic to understand, but what is your do you work with people having addictive behavior, and how do you see addiction?
Yes, I actually worked for a long time in the realm of addiction, so a lot of rehab work and so forth. It's a tough one for me because, as you know, you end up losing the majority of your clients to
Right.
this demon, I like to call it. Essentially, the way I look at it, it's another form of self-regulation. It's just something that someone ended up picking up at one point, and their psyche learned that they can find relief with this, so they're going to go back to it repeatedly. But what they're trying to do is address something deeper, some wound that hasn't truly been targeted. So we just go to ways of numbing it until, the actual substance takes over. And after that, I think we turn into shell of a person. After that, our agency is completely lost.
Very true, yeah, I think as, uh, I write in my book, doing from, tapping into the work of, David Schoen, who's a Jungian. He talks about, Jung and Bill W. talked about in their correspondence, and Jung said, yes, there's this archetype of the devil. And if you let it in, call it different things in different traditions, right? Shiva,
Yes.
Ragnarok,
Hmm.
depends what it is, but it is destruction. And it's once the addict lets it into them, then that's it.
Takes
And I
over.
can relate, because there was a time in my addiction, all I can think of was my own self destruction, or as they call it in AA, suicide by installments. But I was going to
Correct.
destroy myself. And if I dragged down my family, you just didn't care. You were possessed by this, I don't know, Wotan or Ahriman or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, possession is a great way to refer to it. I think that's exactly what happens. And in order to let it go, sometimes you need to let go of a big part of yourself, to kind of, when you have this pesticide that takes over the body, sometimes you need to kill the host symbolically to
Mhm.
get rid of the pesticide. And some people can do it, but I think it takes a lot of courage and determination. I have a lot of respect for people who can overcome addiction because I think it's very tough to deal with it.
Yeah, or you just have today you learn to deal with it. Yeah, it's recovery. It's something else. Yeah, and what do you again, as the intro talked about Elvis and the Wounded Healer, and I'm sure you know the type, whether it's Kurt Cobain or James Dean
Yes.
or Sylvia Plath, it doesn't matter. Do you think these individuals, I think, well, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Could they make great art unless they were tormented, or despite being tormented? What is your view? There's no right or wrong answer, because ultimately this is a mystery, right? It's the numinous.
Well, Irumi says the wound is where the light enters the body. I'm a big fan of this school of thought that I do believe pain gives birth to a lot of greatness if we learn to approach it the right way. Again, it's the philosophy behind the book I've written as well. But what I'm trying to avoid is pain doesn't have to destroy you to construct. Pain can simply be constructive if you learn how to approach it.
Mhm.
Uh, Some of um, some of the people who've created greatness were consumed by the pain. It doesn't have to look like that.
Yeah, yeah. Van Gogh might be another perfect. So many examples
Yes.
throughout history. Or, yeah, beautiful quote by Rumi. It also reminds me. Leonard Cohen famously
Mhm.
said, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And there's no.
Absolutely.
I forgot who said it. There is no perfection, only beautiful versions of brokenness. I
Mm.
think that's all of us, right?
Absolutely. I think to chase for perfection is the mother of all psychological illness, but we are all broken in our own ways. It's
Yeah.
learning to accept our brokenness that gives birth to the next steps of growth.
Exactly. Or in marketing, there's a famous saying that goes, perfection is the enemy of the good. Because
Hmm.
we all don't want to let go. We want to tweak and control it, and we don't let the light in.
Absolutely.
Graham, do you have any more questions on your side?
Oh, definitely. That was one of those where one of my recurring issues with, a lot of modern therapy, and is that they tend to blur together feeling, thinking, and believing. Whereas
Hmm.
for me, those are three very, very distinct, functions of my psyche. I recognize when I'm doing one versus the other. I was
Hmm.
curious if you recognize that you also see that a lot of modern psychology tends to conflate all three of those, and what you think about how that might be addressed or solved. Hey.
Yes, again, I think managed care is what gave birth to this, which is the underlying notion of cognitive therapy. I think it's very helpful in its own ways, right? It gives us a lot of skill that can help the client. But essentially, if we just rest at that, it's a band-aid on the wound because the psyche plays a role in interpreting a situation or a distressful dynamic, but it only has its own version. The body has its own version. The soul has its own version. So, in order to target it completely, we have to bring all those things into consciousness and create harmony or a dialogue between them all for us to get to healing.
Absolutely. No, no, I agree 100%. I just don't, I see too much of the current
Hmm.
therapy. They're not interested in, it's as you sat there and said, I refer to it as salving, putting the band-aid or taking the
Hmm.
aspirin versus solving the problem, which is
Yes.
you pull the nail out of your foot so you stop hurting.
Hmm.
And
Correct.
you need the right solution at the right time. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, and it almost seems like there's not enough solving going around these days. Hey.
I hear you. I hear you.
Exactly. And how do you see? Do you have any opinions about how we are as a society today? I mean, I mentioned shadow projection, and that's all I see today in social media and politicians, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to admit it. I have a rule that if I write anything on the internet, I say there's a 99% chance I'm projecting my own shadow, whether I like something and I say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
just write it down somewhere else and look to see, Miguel, what are you projecting? Because you probably are. And how we've become very defragmented. And yeah, people say, well, these are the best times, but alcoholism, mental
Hmm.
disease, anxiety are just skyrocketing. So, do you have a
Yeah.
positive outlook, or where do you think we are today as a culture?
I think the problem is we're all very fragmented. And when you
Mhm.
are fragmented, you have a big shadow. And when you have a big shadow, you just tend to project that on somebody else. So there's a lot of otherness and, this being wrong and me being right. Whereas the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, um, I hate the division that we are experiencing in our society these days. And I feel like our only salvation is if we bring some integration into all this fragmentation, and hopefully we can get there by enough awareness.
I hope so too. I mean, I know young is probably more popular than ever.
Mhm.
And, even in secular circles, people are talking
Correct.
about shadow work and integration and saying a synchronicity is no longer woo woo in,
Correct.
general society. So I think people are trying, or they're understanding that there lies the answers as a collective. So
I agree with that.
hopefully we can get there. Well, do you for the audience, if they want to work with you, tell them more. Go to your website, or how does it work if they want to start working with you or getting to know you more?
Yes, I would say the best way is to contact us through our website. There is links to the book, to the course, to a free quiz, trauma archetypal quiz that I've created that they can take to know more about their own psychology. our practice information is there, so they can reach out to us. Either me or somebody else from the team will be more than glad to work with them or refer them anywhere that they need to be referred. My hope is that we can all put our hands together and create a more healed world than we live in today.
Amen. Amen. And you work with clients remotely or just in
At
person? Just
both, both.
both. Okay,
Yes,
so you
yes,
can do both. Well,
absolutely.
awesome. Well, if there's no questions for the audience, I know it's a Monday morning, so it's always harder for people to escape. But I'm sure there'll be questions on the comments. As always, please leave a comment for this show or any show. Let us know what you think. We're always trying to work to tweak things and get you the shows that you need. And it's always good to hear from people and seeing what the world is. Always like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But we are at the end. First, I will say, Graham, thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And I was going to sit there and say 1001 Arabian Nights was one of my favorites as a kid, too. So it's always nice to talk to a Shahrazad. I wish you the best.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you both.
Yeah, Shahrzad, thank you very much for coming on the show. Again, show notes. I've got her website. Go visit her, take the quiz. It might be the beginning of a wonderful journey for your next stage of healing and individuation. But thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate, as we say here, your gnosis. And for everybody else, thanks for joining us. We got a show tomorrow with Ana Cortez talking about how playing cards can be portals to other worlds, but definitely to the psyche. And I hope to see you tomorrow. And please enjoy the rest of your day. And as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody.